then
G-spec, case, and then what?
G-spec, case, disadd, counter.
New sheet.
Oh, yeah. And then a new sheet under the counterpart.
Under the counterpart? That's all.
Yeah, at the bottom.
Do you want a new tab for this, or should I split under the counterpart?
I'm sorry?
Do you want a new laptop tab for the new sheet, or do you just want under the
Yeah.
counterpart?
Yeah, new laptop tab.
If you have any.
Yeah. Nice.
You ready, sir?
First, with regards back to the first argument is going to be specifications are infinitely regressive because it's not grounded in the resolution. The resolution is simply says reverse. That's what we do. The second argument is counter-interpretation is going to be we have to specify to the extent of the resolution we need this interpretation because we say normal means we only do what the resolution literally says to do. And so the fourth argument is going to be counter-standard. The first argument is most predictable because resolution launches the research and not the other way around. This turns education when they ask us to go beyond the resolution. The second argument is it solves to the ground because we're not able to link. We're not going to be able to link from anything. There's not going to be abuse, so you're not going to vote on potential abuse. The third argument is solves for infinitely regressive picks because if you look at like the analysis about how like if we go beyond that, that would like literally steal their ground because we're co-opting the case, and so that transparency in education. The next argument is going to be to keep topical education because if we're going to be able to bypass the nonsense. The next argument is going to be you're not going to vote without proven abuse. The next argument is reasonability is the best framework. This is going against our competing interpretation framework. The first argument is there's multiple ways to interpret the resolution. Reciprocity means you're always going to err on the side of the affirmative, and the, like defense on the flow is a counter standard is going to be enough. The competing interpretation is bad for two reasons. First, it begs judge intervention because ultimately you're the one who has to like evaluate the standards, and that's always going to take it out of us, which turns fairness, which is the argument they're trying to go for, and it subsumes the point of the specification. Second, it creates a race to the bottom because you can just create a more limiting or a more interpretation with more ground. That's always going to create a race to the bottom of the interpretation means never because he was never be able to win on the G-spec proper. My first argument is we co-opt their ground at standard. They talk about how it's like heated disadvantage picks. They get this ground with everything they ran the ground, so there's no proven abuse. And the next argument they talk about how it allows checks against affirmative structural inherency. However, we're arguing that like the negative is we're we solve for the infinitely regressive picks. Next is going to be a reverse voting issue of substance crowd out. They're always substance crowd out, even when they run specifications like this, which takes away from the actual substantive purpose of the entire debate. This is an independent voting issue for you to vote them down. Next is going to be a substance crowd out of time trade-off. I've had to sit up here and spend like a minute of my speech time on this, and so this means like we're always going to be uniquely like it turns our ground standard about how the structural argumentation because they can simply throw this out and like kick it in the next speech. So don't let them kick. On the topic case. Extend the arguments about how fiat test should, not can. This means that the entire ground specification goes away because we don't need to interpret, like, we don't need to tell them what part of the Fourth Amendment. When we say the Fourth Amendment, we are just testing whether or not this should happen through the impacts of case, which is where the entirety of the rest of the debate takes place, and so we should argue that we should move on to that. The next argument is we don't have to provide existing case. They don't argue any of these solvency points, which mean they're going across and you're never going to be voting on G-spec.
And clarifying the Fourth Amendment thing would be like an 80-page plan text.
Yeah, next argument that clarifying the Fourth Amendment thing would be an 80-page plain text because there have been numerous Supreme Court decisions on this, and so we'd have to like go way beyond the course of scope of debate. We actually increased education from our interpretation. You're always going to be voting for fairness. On the advantage. They make four arguments. The first argument is that bullying is inevitable because we can't force a mindset shift. My argument is we don't force a mindset shift. We keep people in the same mindset, but we make them not want to bully anymore because they are unsure that the people are unarmed anymore. And so this means like we're not forcing a mindset shift, but we're forcing an action shift. The next argument is they say we don't stop school shootings because violence is rhetorical in nature now and weapons increase it results in physical violence later. We're arguing that like mutual deterrence is always going to stop check back for the physical violence, and that rhetorical violence turns into real violence. An example, like in just the last year, 3 students nationwide have committed suicide. One person jumped off a bridge and the other person shot himself in the head this rhetorical violence actually translates into physical violence, and so when there's mutual deterrence, it's always going to check back better. We're going to solve better. The next argument is that increased monitoring is going to result in the student backlash. We're arguing that we're arguing that the monitoring in the status quo is far more than there would be post-plan, and so that means that any backlash would have been seen already. And so we're actually solving for this. This is another net benefit to case.
So on school grounds, our argument here is that the violence happens at school grounds.
Yeah, they said solve on school grounds. Our argument is like the violence happens on school grounds, and so like apart from school grounds, that's not what we're solving for. But we're solving for like the bullying that literally happens in the forced recess time on school grounds. So that's net benefit what we're solving for.
Quickly.
Okay.
Last question.
On the advantage 2 of agency, cross-apply extend the entirety of advantage 2, which means we're garnering impacts of like social inequality and detachment being internal into violence, and so this means it is always going to outweigh the other advantage, which talks about like reprimanded social consequences, and so you're always going to be voting for us on the net benefit framework. On their dissent,
I have a question.
I'll get you to the bottom if I have time. On their dissent. Go to the internal link level. The first argument they make is like political capital courts is allowing framing as a business issue. My first argument is absolutely not a business issue. We're seeing this is going to be a completely social issue. There's no way to construe it, which means it's a fundamental link takeout, which means the entire disadvantage and impacts go away. The next argument is going to be on the impact level. My first argument is being non-unique. Monsanto restructured in 2008, which means that they are now considered and their ranking on the largest polluters index went down by twofold, and so we're going to see that they're not polluting anymore because they're changing chemical composition of Roundup, which is what they're using with their genetically modified organisms and seeds in order to be able to do this. And so this is this is greatly decreasing the impact of their case. The next argument is going to be that like they talk about how GMOs are bad. My first argument is going to be like turn GMOs are good because they allow use in like developing nations because they're cheaper and they can actually get food when there is none. And so when there's a dichotomy between any food and no food, we're seeing that GMOs are actually the only thing that can actually uniquely humanize people. The next argument is it's key to third world restructuring because like agriculture needs to exist before any other infrastructure can exist. And so when they don't have the money to do agriculture, it literally relegates them to third world nations for the entirety of time. This is what's almost going to outweigh the impacts of their case because if you can't be humanized, it doesn't matter if you're alive or not. The next argument is going to be that like, it's key to terrorist recruiting. We're going to see that like when people are living in poverty, it increases terrorist recruitment rates, and this is always going to be uniquely bad because it results in like because terrorist recruiting is the only thing terrorists need in order to be able to extend their power of terror. And so we're seeing that like nuclear terrorism is already on the brink to the status quo. We lose 4% of our plutonium in the status quo, and this means generated from power reactions. And so this means that with more manpower is all terrorist groups need in order to be able to result in a devastating nuclear attack because the size of a baseball can literally level New York City. The next argument is going to be technology checks because we can literally checks for erosion. We can literally put nutrients into the soil now with other things like that Monsanto gives out with nutrient enhancers for the soil. And so this means it checks back because monocultures are always going to be able to have the nutrients they need, and it's going to check back for the entirety of the erosion they talk about. And so when the erosion internal link is gone, this means it's not going to be eroding into the entirety of the Gulf of Mexico and stuff and into water argumentations, which means the environmental collapse is going to be not going to happen. Next on the environmental collapse and extinction, my argument is going to be this has been empirically denied in the past, and so we're going to see that when we've used Roundup has already been used in a much worse condition than it has in the status quo. We've seen this the environmental harm hasn't happened.
On the monoculture is good because it allows us to, with one tweak of the genetics, stop like these plagues and stuff like that.
The next argument is monoculture is good because with one tweak of genetics we can stop the plague. So they're saying they're contending in they're working on a faulty premise that says that if the monocultures are going to result in this plague, that it would just continue to propagate. However, with monocultures we can actually, because we have the genetics under control, we're able to always check back for that more so than with natural argumentations. Yeah. Okay. On their counterplan. My first argument is it's going to be struck down as unconstitutional because of the Supreme Court case that we are having to overturn. That means plan is always a prerequisite to this working. That's the perm. The United States Supreme do plan and counterplan. Basically, do them simultaneously. The United States Supreme Court is going to overrule its decision, and the United States federal government will prohibit search and seizure. My first argument is this is going to be net beneficial because because the counterplan has a complete solvency deficit because the Constitution is a prerequisite to policy change, and so we're seeing that we're always able to solve better. And the next argument is we're going to be able to solve for their advantages better because it's going to be perceived as unity among the government, which means we're always going to avoid. And the next argument is on the disadvantage. We're always going to be avoiding the plan causes like the liberal win because we're going to be seeing that Kennedy's going to get to do what he wants to do anyway, and it's going to be perceived as the Congress is going to check back for that, so we're not inciting the link of the disadvantage. The next argument is we are still solving for the entirety of the case because cross-apply their solvency, we solve for we're actually being able to do that. Next argument is we solve probability better because their second solvency argument talks about rollback, and we're arguing that this is absolutely going to be rolled back without a constitutional change. That's the absolute only way to solve. On the net benefits, we're going to stop the perception as big brother.
Republicans are not pressured at all. They vote in unison on everything.
Yeah. The next argument is Republicans are not going to be pressured at all because they're going to be voting on unison on everything.
What's your question, Joe? Sorry.
Yeah.
Joe, your question.
Okay. On the bottom sheet.
No.
Okay, no? I can just throw out a couple arguments. Okay, there's a couple arguments. First argument is that conditionality is good. The interpretation is you must run a conditional counterplan. The violations is you don't. The standards first going to be key to real world education. Testing hypothesis, key to scientific method. You're literally destroying us from accessing real world education by literally getting tunnel vision. This is bad for policymaking and it has real world impacts. It's key to real world politics and education is the point of debate that assumes the point of this is an independent voting issue for competing for the reasonability framework which you give you in the top.